Okay, so today we're going to look at Aquinas's first way or first cosmological argument. This is the first of three of his cosmological arguments, and it's called the argument from motion. So the idea is that motion exists. So motion, by the way, is essentially change. He says that motion exists in a chain. So one thing causes another thing to change and so on. But that chain can't go on forever. So there must be a first mover. There must be something that set all change in motion. There must be a first mover. And of course, he thinks that first mover is God. So I think it's probably a good idea just to go through a couple of definitions, because these three over here are words that we're going to use throughout this tutorial. So the first one is motion. So I've defined motion already as change. I think probably the best way of putting it is kind of, so motion I would say is changing from potentiality to actuality. Okay, so it's going from potentiality to over here actuality. Probably now we need to define what potentiality and actuality are. They're pretty much what they say on the tin. So potentiality is kind of being ready to be something. So think of say a ball that is high up, right? It's got the potentiality to fall. So going from the state of being high up to the state which is to the state of actually falling. So actuality is being in a state. Here's another example that might help you. So say water is at, I don't know, 30 degrees Celsius, okay? It's in actuality, it is liquid, but it's got the potentiality to be steam and the potentiality to be ice. If you add in something that is cold, let's say, something that's really cold, like a freezer, which is already in actuality below 0 degrees Celsius, then it'll pass on its actuality to this potentially solid ice and make it actually ice. So that's what he means by motion. It's change in the world. There's nothing coming into existence or going out. That's not what this one's about. This is just about things changing from potentiality to actuality. So Aquinas writes his all of his 5 ways in his book, The Summa Theologica, which is one of his 2 main texts, the Summa Theologica and the Summa Contra Gentiles. Now, the Summa Theologica, kind of written as a textbook for his students, it contains a whole load of reasoning. This is just one very small element. In fact, it is this long. Okay, not that small. I admit that it's a long paragraph that's just appeared on your page, but don't panic. We're going to spend the rest of the tutorial going through it very, very carefully. I say we start. Let's go for it. Okay, so he says this is the first way, remember. The first and more manifest way is the argument from motion, and that's why we have the title, Argument from Motion. Here he says, it is certain and evident to our senses. So this is an a posteriori argument. It is a posteriori, which means, of course, it is based on our senses, at least and especially this first part here. that in the world some things are in motion. Okay, so he's saying, look, when I look around me, I see things that are in motion. And motion, remember, is changing from potentiality to actuality. So now, whatever is in motion is put in motion by another. Now, this is one of his big claims. You've got to establish this in order to establish this chain that we were talking about earlier. Okay, so he's saying for nothing can be. This is his reason now for thinking that if something is in motion, it's put in motion by something else. Nothing can be in motion except it is in potentiality to that towards which it is in motion, whereas a thing moves in as much as it is in act. So it goes, this is the act part over here, it goes from potentiality to actuality based upon something moving it. So motion then is all about being moved. And going from potentiality to actuality is what we call this, or what Aquinas calls here, this is the act of moving. Okay, that's what he means by motion. This part here is motion. As soon as, sorry, that was really badly written, that motion, wasn't it? Shall I try again? Go on, I'll try again. I'll put it slightly higher up. So that's what we mean by motion, this act of moving from one to the other. Do you think I have to find a motion enough times? Probably. I have to find it like 3 times already in this tutorial, and we're only, we're 7 minutes in. Wow, we're really going for it. Okay, so motion then is going from potentiality to actuality. As soon as you're in a new actuality, you've got other potentialities, of course. So he says, for motion is nothing else than the reduction of something from potentiality to actuality. Motion is that action here. For nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. So you can't go from potentiality to actuality apart from with something that has caused you to go from that, something that is already in that state. He gives us an example. So thus, that which is actually hot, say fire, makes wood, which is potentially hot, actually hot, and thereby moves and changes it. So he's saying, look, this has got the actuality of hotness, this kind of fire thing. And this has got the potentiality of hotness and the actuality of coldness. So we put them together. That causes that to go from potentiality to actuality. And we get a nice fire. Okay. Now, it is not possible that the same thing should be at once. Not possible that the same thing should be at once in actuality and potentiality. So it can't be in both things at the same time in the same respect. So something, basically he's saying something like wood here can't be both on fire and not on fire. It can be in other states of potentiality and actuality, but in that respect it can't be both on fire and not on fire, but only in different respects, as he says. For what is actually hot cannot simultaneously be potentially hot, but it is simultaneously potentially cold. Okay, it is therefore impossible that the same respect and in the same way a thing should be both mover and moved. So what he's saying here is that because something can't be both kind of potentially and actually something, but something in actuality is required to move something into from potentiality to actuality, that something can't be the thing itself, it must be something else. There must, in other words, be a chain of motion. Therefore, whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another. If that by which it is put in motion be itself put in motion, then this must also need be put in motion by another, and by another again. There must, in other words, be a chain of motion. What he's saying is, look, if you have a thing here that is caused, there's a thing that is that changes from one state to another. Well, it can't change itself because it can't be both actually and potentially something. So if it's potentially something, it must be changed from potentially to actually by something that is already actually something. But how did that get to actually something? Well, it must be changed by something else that is going from potentially to actually, and so on, and so on, to infinity, surely. But can it go to infinity? No, says Aquinas. This cannot go on to infinity, because then there would be no first mover and consequently no other mover, seeing that subsequent movers move only inasmuch as they are put in motion by the first mover, as the staff moves only because it is put in motion by the hand. Now, this is one of the oddest parts, okay? This rests on kind of a scholastic understanding of infinity. He thinks that you can't have an infinite chain. Why? Well, he gives us the example of a staff and a hand. He says, look, if this staff's moving and you only see the staff, you must think there must be something that is ultimately moving it, someone's hand moving it, right? You can't explain the movement of the staff with another staff and another staff and another staff. That's not okay. Think of it, maybe, J.L. Mackie puts it slightly differently. He says, look, if you have like a link in a... Ooh, interesting. If you have a link in a chain here, well, it's supported by another link in the chain and another link in the chain. And he says you can't... What Aquinas' reasoning is, you can't explain this dangling chain with an infinity of chains. Instead, there must be some sort of ultimate kind of anchoring thing up here to which the chain is ultimately connected. In the same way, you can't have any kind of infinite chain because there has to be an ultimate cause. There has to be an ultimate cause. Okay, so we have this chain of motion in the world. This chain can't go on forever because then it would never have started in the first place. Therefore, there must be a first mover put in motion by no other. Otherwise, it's just a link in the chain, right? And this, he thinks, everyone understands to be God. That is his conclusion. There must be a first mover, and that first mover is God. Now, I just want to very quickly, I'm aware that this is becoming a long tutorial, but I want to very quickly just summarize Aquinas' argument here. So he starts with premise 1, that there is motion in the world, and he knows that through his sensations, right? He knows that a posteriori. Motion he defines as moving from potentiality to actuality. Then premise 2, he says, the cause of motion must be in actuality. Why must it be in actuality? Because to move something from potentiality to actuality, you have to already be in that state. Like fire changes something that is cold to something that is hot, because fire is already hot. Premise 3, something can't be in potentiality and actuality at the same time. In the same way, something can't be both, say, hot and cold. So conclusion 1, things in motion must be moved by something else. Okay, so now we've got our first part of the argument. We've established essentially a chain. There must be a chain of motion. That's, if you put premise 1, there is motion and things can't be moved by must be moved by something else, you get a chain of motion in the world. Well, he says, a chain cannot go on to infinity, and so the only conclusion we can have is that there must be a first link in that chain. That is Aquinas' argument from motion.